So nice to see you guys. So I've been thinking a little bit about this story of the Magi. But I think there's two particular points that this story makes to us. One is that God works in a messy world, and we could find that all over the Bible, right, Sally? And the second is that the decision, the motivating orientation of the Magi in the end was that of divine love. Those are the 2 points I'm going to make from this story. Okay, how's that sound, Bill? Good enough? We're going to do that. We're going to work messy world and divine love, and I think that's what this story is about. But I want to read it, and then I want to go and I want to pull it apart, the historical context of this as well, and to get a sense of that hypothesis. Because, well, let's read it again, 2:1 through 12, and then let's look at it. Somebody want to read it for us?
Where?
Oh, Matthew.
Oh. Sorry.
1 through 12.
Yeah.
Matthew,
what?
2, 1
Try to
through
look to
12.
Diana.
Good Lord. All right. Who has a Bible that can read? Bill, can you read for us? Chapter 2, verses 1 through 12 from Matthew.
Okay. Very good. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And when he gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, but thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him also." When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshiped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way.
Thank you. So we talked about this a little last week, right? About the Magi and who. But before we get into that, this is a super interesting text, isn't it? Because we have these sort of questions that it provokes that don't give us any answers. You know, so one of the questions is, why was Herod frightened? 3 guys on a camel, Sally? Right? So why was Herod frightened? Why was all of Jerusalem frightened? Right? That's a question.
They weren't used to foreigners.
Possibly, yeah, Jerusalem, come on, crossroads, baby. No. I mean, that place was full of foreigners. Why did Herod want to meet with them in secret? You know, he's a king. Why did he want to meet with him in secret? Possibly. But what would that have to do, right? I mean, he was still running the show. Right, so we have some interesting questions here. Why would he cut a deal with them? You know, come back here and tell me, and what will I do? What did he say?
I can worship
then I'll come and worship you. Like, that's some pretty interesting stuff, right? So he's afraid. Jerusalem's afraid. He wants to meet with them in secret. He's setting it up so he may cut a deal with them. And so you know right away that the image of that these wise men that are coming into Jerusalem, if there are three guys on the camel, we determined last week that that's probably not the case, didn't we? Then they got a lot of sway. I mean, there's something going on. And usually when you see something like this happen, it's sort of like, have you ever witnessed people who are in a conflict? Maybe it's a married couple, and like the spouse will say something to the spouse, and then the spouse like just totally loses it. And you're like, dude, what was it? Like, wow, you know what? All she said was take a right here, right? You know, I mean, and like, but the reason that happens is because there's freight, right? I mean, that there's a whole train car behind that relationship, and maybe every time who knows what happened at that right turn at some point along the way, right? So you know there's a lot there, and so I think we have that same thing in this story. There's a lot here that are determining that anxiety in Jerusalem and determining Herod's fear and determining why he wants to meet with them in secret, right? So there's a big background story on this, and which means that there's probably more than three guys on camels coming with 3 boxes of gifts for the baby Jesus. You with me? A little bit? That makes sense. So anyway, so what we have here then is, any questions about that? John Kerry? Okay, nothing, as long as there's nothing from John. Because John's causing me some problems. Because he's stepping out of the box and he's doing his own research on the wise men.
And he just went off of mute.
Oh, no. Put him on mute. And so he stepped out of the box, and now he's looking into the wise men himself, and stumbled across a book. What's it called, John?
Let's see, what is it? The Revelation of the Magi.
By a guy named Lauder, right? So anyway,
It's an old manuscript that he translated that was stashed away in the Vatican, and it's not, sort of been forgotten for 1,000 years. But it's weird. It does not enlighten us at all. It's a red herring.
it's weird, but because of John now, I had to order it. I'm gonna have to read it. So I'm just saying that's
Good for you, John.
so that's just making my life a little more difficult then. So thank you, John. That's why we don't want anybody doing their own research, right? Anyway, it should be pretty interesting read. I'm looking forward to reading it. So anyway, so what do we know? And what do we talk about? And I think I want to start working under the premise that we have a pretty interesting relationship deep into the bowels of history between the Jews and the Persians. Okay, this is the premise we're gonna start with here. And within sort of the historical evidence indicates that within the Persian community, they had a group, maybe even a more sophisticated group, known as the Medes, that served the leadership in the same way that who served the leadership within the Jewish community?
Levites.
The Levites, exactly like that. And so we have this picture of the the Medes in the Persian community, who are the doctors and the lawyers and the government leaders and let me see, the priests and the astrologers and all of that. They were a caste, if you will, of learned folks that served the Persian Brahmin. They weren't really the Brahmin, but you get the idea, right? And so we have that, and the history of that traces back to who in the Bible. We talked about this last week also. Good Lord. John.
Traces back to Cyrus the Great, and then
And
Nehemiah and Daniel. Daniel?
Daniel, right? And so Daniel was the one who had the problem in Persia. He was made a satrap, right? And that's the story of Daniel in the lion's den, isn't it? Because he was an outsider who was brought in to be a leader because of his competence within the Persian government. And it turns out that he was not only a little bit competent, he was the most competent, and he becomes the sort of the head satrap in the Persian Empire. But what that unfolds is the idea that the community of the Medes, the Magi, then sort of begins to extend beyond a tribal affiliation to a competence or a magisterium or affiliation. Unlike the Levites, incidentally, who remained tribal until they disappeared in the raising of the temple in 70 AD. So anyway, so you have this, and then what does that then touch upon for us in our nativity scenes? Sally's up.
I'm lost.
So we have the Magi, right? And we've determined that the Magi who serve the Persian government are people who are there by competence rather than by tribal affiliation. And so we can assume from that the people who are there could be from where? Anywhere, right? And so when we have a group of different looking men in our nativity scene, right? They could be from anywhere and still be Magi. You know, they could be from Ethiopia, from Saudi Arabia, or from Yemen, or from China, and have been recruited or taken over and then culled, because that's what they used to do, right? Remember when Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon came in and took over Jerusalem? You don't remember that. You weren't there. So I understand why you might not. So what Nebuchadnezzar did, of course, and they all did this, he came in and they took all of the wealthy, all of the leaders, all the powerful, all the smart, all the good looking, and they moved all the guys who were good at sports, I think, and they moved them all back to Babylon. And then they took a bunch of people that they had conquered over here, and then they moved them down to Jerusalem, right? That's what they did. They would take sort of the administrative people or the wealthy people or the leaders, and they bring them back because you can watch them if they're in your backyard, and then you relocate other people, right? So that's what they did. The Babylonians did it, and the Persians did it, and the Romans. People did that, right? That was part of the pattern. And so now you have
So where's Babylon, like modern day?
Iraq.
Okay.
Are you trying to say that the Magi could have been Jews?
Well, that wasn't what I was saying, but yeah, that's absolutely what I'm saying. That's an absolute. There's probably no doubt that within the magisterium, right, the ruling and government, sort of the intellectual elite, if you will. What do they call them now? But anyway, the intellect. There's probably Jews for sure in that community.
Yeah, ones that never came back.
Oh yeah, no question about it. Or that somehow it transferred there to work. Like, I mean, right? They could have arrived there at any particular time. They could have been recruited to come and be part of the magisterium based on a certain competence or capacity. I think it's great insight. And I think that's good. Mr. Sally's starting to track here, guys. She's tracking. And thank God, we're grateful for that. So anyway, so you have this this community of Medes who become a Magi, who are magisterium, who work as a competence class within the Persian Empire, and people can be brought into that, as an example, as Daniel was an example, as their job, right? As what they do. So now let's fast forward to Jerusalem, okay? So we'll fast forward from the days of Daniel, and Daniel was around when? Who has the dates on Daniel, approximately?
500 BC, 600 BC.
Right, 450, 500 BC, that's right. And so let's fast forward and the Persian Empire is sort of where they are over in Persia, and you have they had been in a pitched battle with who? Who was the big enemy at the time, the world conqueror?
Syria.
The Greeks. The Greeks. It's before we get to the Seleucids, a little before that, and that's Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great shows up out of Greece, and he goes stomping across the Middle East, and he stomps on what?
And he stops.
He stomps on Jerusalem, right? And then he goes out and he battles with the Persians. And he gets right up there, but he doesn't quite take over the Persians. Am I right on that, Charles? In my history? Yeah, so he gets up there and he runs up against the Persians, and he's got this battle. So anyway, he settles back, and when he dies, Alexander the Great's empire splits, doesn't it? And it splits between the two factions. One faction in the south, which is run by the Egyptians, and one faction in the north called the Seleucids, which is run out of Syria, as John said. Right. So now you have the Seleucids, and they get Jerusalem and sort of all of the property right up against the Persian Empire. And so you got this sort of tension there. It's sort of like a NATO-Russia thing, to bring it into a modern context. Right on that line, there's a little tension going on between the Persians and the Seleucids. Now the Seleucids are doing little battles over here. They're doing little battles over there. They're fighting with folks. They don't have a ruler like Alexander the Great. They're starting to wane in their capacity to rule. And then you got this ugly little community that's growing up here in Italy, right? And all of a sudden they're pushing hard on the Egyptians, and they're pushing hard on the Seleucids, and they're paying a lot of attention, these big empires, to that little group called the Romans. And when they do that, what happens? There's breathing space all of a sudden for all the little rebels to do what they want to do. So Persia settles down, right? They're not thinking about Persia because they have Rome that's biting at their heels. And what happens in Jerusalem? Does anybody know? At the time?
You talking about 500? Or you?
No. I'm at like 100. Sorry, I just jumped to 100.
Yeah.
BC.
Jesus is born.
No, before Jesus.
Okay.
It's when
What's happening in Jerusalem?
the Maccabeans take over.
Maccabeans, right? Joseph the Hammer. The Hammer, Sally. Oh yeah. The Hammer steps up and comes crashing down to rebuild the empire of the Hebrews, right? King David and his clan. And so all of a sudden, Jerusalem and Judea get some independence again for the first time in 700 years or something, like big drought, maybe 800 years. So not a lot going on for 800 years, but they're back because of the hammer. But they're really back, why? Because of the Romans. Because the Romans are distracting the Seleucids, and they're ignoring what's going on in Jerusalem. Because they can, you with me, Sally? Because they can come stamp that out at any moment in time.
So who's back at 100 BC? I'm not following.
The Maccabees. So
Yeah,
there's-
okay, that's the hammer. So who are those? Are those the Jews?
The Jews, yep, they're the
Okay.
Jews, and they are, and what they do when Joseph Maccabee, the Hammer, it's his nickname.
Okay.
I think that's because he fought with a hammer. So, or maybe a sword. I don't know. He was sort of the Thor of the Jewish community. So anyway, so they rise up, and then he puts out the word, and he says, all of you Jews in Babylon and Persia and all over the place, come on back. Come on back. We're going to hold. Some do and some don't. Because, who are the ones that don't come back from Persia or Babylon or Egypt or
The ones that are doing
the ones that are kicking it, right? You got a good job in Persia. You're not coming back to Jerusalem. Give me a break. Backwater, what a mess. So, but a lot of the riffraff come back, sort of the fortune seekers or the second sons or whatever. And they arrive in Jerusalem. So they're all sort of looking for a fight. Now, the great thing about that is those are the guys who end up doing a lot of fighting amongst themselves when the Romans land. But we're going to talk about that later. Because, so they arrive back, And what they do, what they haven't done for a long time, is they establish the priest king. Right? So the high priest in the Maccabee family is also the king of Jerusalem and Judea. Right? So they've reestablished the high priest and the king, and the Maccabeans take over that. And there's a little fighting, right? So there's one faction of the family, and they take over a guy, Hycuus, I think his name is, and he takes over, and he's sort of a Pharisee. And then he gets in a battle with another guy named Aristobulus, and Aristobulus then kicks out the Hycunas family, and his family comes in, and they're Sadducees, and they're ruling as king priests from 76 to 63 BC. You with me?
Sounds like today.
Little-
Everybody's battling with everybody else.
Everybody was battling with everybody else. And they're doing, so the Pharisees were like, the Republicans, and the Sadducees were the Democrats. That's not true. I don't know, maybe it's the other way around. Anyway, they're battling with each other, and it's not over the vote, incidentally, because it's over the hammer. So now you have Aristobulus and his family who are in charge up until 63, and then what happens in 63? Who
Pompey,
comes? Who?
Pompey.
Pompey comes crushing through town, right? And all of a sudden, all those tough guys who ran Judea and Jerusalem are just smushed by Pompey, right? Rome is on the ascent. And they come stomping through town, and they take over Jerusalem on their way to Persia. Is that what happens? Hold on. So they come, so now they come stomping through town, and they stop there. And what they do then is they put their own guy in charge. And the guy they put in charge is a guy named, anybody know?
Herod.
Herod Antipas, his dad, right? So he takes over there, I think, after Pompey conquers, and then things are sort of, they're at ease there, and Antipater he's not the high priest, right? So now we got that split, and this is going to cause Herod the Younger some real complications. But Antipater is put in charge as the governor, and Rome, in their sort of genius, remember they have Aristobulus had been the king and priest there in Jerusalem before Pompey comes in. Pompey comes in, stomps on Jerusalem, takes this guy Antipater, right, and makes him king. But then they bring back in Hyrcanus, the other family, right, who had lost to the Aristobulus family, and put them as high priest. You tracking, Diane? So anyway, now we have in Jerusalem, Rome on charge, Antipater is the governor, a different high priest, and things sort of settle out. For what? Until about 55 AD, when BC, when Jerusalem starts to fight among itself between the high priest and the king Antipas, or the governor Antipater. And so then who comes in? Anybody know? What? Crassus. Is that how you say it? Crassus, the governor, or the general, the Roman general. He comes in and he stomps on Jerusalem, gets him in order, and then he moves on. This is 55, and he goes to Persia, and now he's going to take over Persia. And what happens when he gets to Persia is he loses 30,000 Roman troops to the Persians. And the Persians come running back, and as the Romans are retreating, the Persians come in and they flood the area of Jerusalem and Palestine.
Who does that? Who floods?
The Persian army does in their counterattack, right? And they come sweeping through there, and this is in about 55 BC. But then they leave, right? They don't establish any power presence there at that time. But in about, so now you still have Antipater and you have Herod, who's sort of establishing himself as a leader there. So you have the Persians coming in, chasing the Romans out, but they don't leave a presence. So they still control the area of Jerusalem for another 15 years. But they've had this experience of Persian might stomping through their neighborhood. You with me?
So the Romans covered for another 15 years.
Yep, so the Romans are still there, and Antipater's still in charge, and they still have the split between the high priest and the governor under Rome at that time. But then in 43 BC, the Persians invade. And the Persians come in to Jerusalem and they take over. And when they do that, Antipater and Herod disappear, right? They leave town. And what do the Persians do? Who do they put in charge? The son of Aristobulus, right? That the guy who had been the high priest, and then the Romans replaced him, then they put in his son, right? They're always doing this. They're playing one off the other, and he becomes the high priest in 40 BC. And Herod takes off. So now we have the Persians ruling Jerusalem. Are you with me?
Was Archelaus, what was his name again? Archelaus, was he Herod's son? That's what this Bible says.
No, Aristobulus was from the Maccabees.
Okay.
So now we have the Persians back.
So he's not Persian, he's Jewish.
He's Jewish, yes, the high priest has to be Jewish. And so he's ruling in about 40 BC. You tracking with me, this back and forth piece, a little bit, Sally, a little bit?
Are the Persians putting him in because the majority of the people in Jerusalem are Jewish? So they're keeping him, so that's their hold on power, but Persians will not be Jewish.
Right, so they put their own person in the high priesthood, right? So the Romans had their person in, we had the two conflicts within the Maccabees. The Romans chose one, the Persians chose the other. Sort of like two big, strong families in Jerusalem, and they want their person there. Why do they want to control the temple? Do we have a sense of why they would want to control the temple?
When you
Eric, what do you say?
Well, I think there's a lot of resources involved in controlling the temple, for one thing.
It is the economy. It is money. I think that's exactly right. So they want to control the economy. And if you're going to control the economy, you control the temple. So that's exactly right. So anyway, so while they're in where the Persians are in Jerusalem, Antipater dies, and Herod goes down to Egypt and then up to Rome. And when he goes down to Egypt, he becomes best friends with who? Roman scholars. He's down in Egypt with his good-looking girlfriend.
Anthony,
Anthony,
Mark Antony's down there with his good-looking girlfriend. Who's that?
Elizabeth Taylor.
No, it's not Elizabeth.
Cleopatra.
Close. Close. So anyway, so Herod goes down there and he chums up with Mark Antony, and they become pretty good friends. And I don't know, probably gets to meet Cleopatra, and so he's down there for a while. But then what happens within Rome, which is why Rome, incidentally, isn't paying any attention to Jerusalem and Persia, because what's going on at the same time over here in Rome?
Civil War,
Civil War. Between who?
Caesar.
Mark
No, no.
Antony,
No.
Octavius,
Yeah,
and Octavius. So they go to war with each other, and who loses?
Mark Antony.
Mark
Mark
Antony.
Antony. Here's the genius of Herod. Herod had a lot of shortcomings. He's very thin-skinned, killed his mom, killed his brothers, killed a bunch of his kids, right? So people would like sort of get under his skin and he would just kill them. He had a lot of forts where he could go high. But he was pretty good at I don't know if he was good at managing down, but he was good at managing up. And as he saw this conflict occurring between Octavius and Mark Antony, even though he and Mark Antony were pals, he sided with Octavius.
The winner.
The winner. So Octavius becomes Caesar Augustus. And when he does, he crowns Herod king of the Jews.
Was Octavius Julius Caesar's son? I can't remember.
Adopted son, I think.
Okay.
But it's all the same, right? I mean, sort of, you look around and you say, who do you think you want as a son? And you just pick that one and then you adopt them, right? As opposed to whatever you happen to have. You'd be like, yeah, no, I'm taking that guy over there. And then you adopt him. So
was Herod able to leave Jerusalem and kind of, while this was going on, and obviously he didn't do anything to protect his town or wherever, and Rome was so busy being that they didn't recognize that here's this guy not doing anything that's good or towards Rome and wandering around, and now he's weaseling his way back in. And he did this without.
Well, I mean, I think they knew they had a problem with Persia, right? So Persia wasn't Herod's fault in a sense, right? I mean, he's just a little dude running a small backwater Jerusalem, Israel, crazy town over here. And so I think they knew they had a bigger problem, and he was a single fact. And everybody in politics loves a good single fact. Just look around at the political world today; you love a good single fact. And so he was on target with that, and he picked the winner, which is also good. And so when he did, now Octavius, who's Caesar Augustus, is puffing up his chest and he's consolidating the system, and he's ready now to reestablish Roman supremacy worldwide. So that coincides with Herod being there in Rome. He pronounces him king of the Jews, and then he gives him a big army. And they slowly start marching back to kick the Persians out and take over that part of the world. And so he arrives. So let's just
Kick the Persians out of Jerusalem.
Yeah. You with me on this in this story so far? A little bit. So he but at the time, so now Jerusalem is being ruled by the Persians, and Pacorus is the king of Persia, and he's a pretty good king, and he's been king for about 12 years. And in 38 AD, he dies. So when he dies in Persia, you have a power vacuum that's going on over there. And his death coincides with Herod's army coming from Rome to take over Jerusalem. And so Herod shows up in Jerusalem, and the Persians just shoot back home to try to figure out what's going on. All right? So they sort of gave up the city. It wasn't a big fight. Herod reestablishes himself as king in Jerusalem, and the Persians have disappeared. This is about 37 BC. So the Persians have been ruling from 40 to about 37. When the Romans were fighting over here, Herod's coming back to take over Jerusalem, and Pacorus, the king of the Persians, dies. There's a battle over here. Now, who's in the middle of the battle back here in Persia? Who's in the fight right now for ascendancy or to decide who's going to be the next king? The Magi, the magisterium. I mean, that's where it's taken place because they're the kingmakers, right? They're like the Senate, if you will. And so back here, there's this battle for who's going to be the king of Persia. And it turns out the guy who takes over is a guy named Phraates. And Phraates is a nightmare. Phraates is a nightmare. So he becomes, he's put in charge. He's a nightmare. He's a murderer. People hate him. He's a dictator. He's all the bad things that Pacorus wasn't when he was ruling. And so now he's in power. So what are you going to do if you have a terrible leader in charge? Coup. You have a coup. Who leads the coup?
Imagine.
The Magi lead the coup, right? And they kick Phrades out. But they make a mistake. What's the mistake?
You leave him alive.
They leave him alive. That's the mistake. That's a mistake Saddam Hussein didn't make. Like when Saddam Hussein had his coups, man, he always took out the guy. If you're gonna have a coup, you want to get rid of him. Magi, a little too big-hearted. That's what they. So anyway, so they take over.
Who's they? The Magi.
The Magi, they put another guy in charge, Tridatus, or I don't know how to say, Tiridates, becomes the new leader of Persia. And he lasts for 2 years. Why? Because Phrades shows up again, and Phrades takes over. What does Phrades do that the Magi hadn't done? He kills him, and he takes over. But who's he mad at?
Magi.
He's mad at the Magi. And so now over here in Persia, we have a really hardcore dictator. The governing body that had tried to throw him out now is being punished, and they just they go dormant for a while, right? So you got the Magi sort of stirring over here, right? Waiting in the wings, if you will, for Phrades to die. And over here in Jerusalem, you got Herod, who's on top now, and he's trying to manage all the crazy that's going on in Jerusalem with all of the different parties, right? You have the 5 different religious parties going on, and you have the Roman governor who's there, and you have Herod, who's the king of the Jews, and then you have the high priest. It's a hot mess. Jerusalem's a hot mess. It was a hot mess 2,000 years ago. It's still a hot mess. That's not true. And so you got Herod sort of playing this game over here. And that lasts for a long time because Herod rules from about 37 AD to 2 AD. So, you traveling with me? Are you with me a little bit in the story? A little bit. So while, how are we doing on time? So while the Magi over here, what are they doing? Right? What are they doing with their time while they're sort of waiting for Phrades to die?
Plotting.
They're plotting, right? And they're looking, and they're thinking, and they're anticipating. And so what they do is they start going back through their old books, right? And their Jewish compatriots and stuff, and they start wondering where the next king's going to come from. Because does a king have to be from the bloodline of the king? No, not Persian.
No. Just adopted.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you get a good one, right? And so why would you take that one when you got a good one? So they start looking and thinking, and what they do then is they start flipping through. They look up at the skies, right? They probably do some mathematics. I don't know, maybe that'll tell them something. And they start flipping back through the ancient books. And when they flip back through the ancient books, they find what we talked about last time in the Old Testament, the star prophecies. And they find the star prophecies from 2 prophets. We talked about it last week. Daniel talks about a star rising into which a king from the east will come forth, but also Balaam. Do you guys remember Balaam, a son of Beor? Thank you, Bill. Bill remembers him. Now, Balaam, son of Beor, was a prophet, but he wasn't a Jewish prophet. And the king of the Amorites wanted him to go and curse the Jews. And so he went to curse the Jews. But what kept him from cursing the Jews? A talking donkey. The Bible, baby.
That's where the talking mule came from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's a talking donkey. So anyway,
I love it.
when the donkey saw the angel that Balaam, son of Beor, couldn't see, and it was a complicated little story, but nonetheless, he couldn't curse the
There's a lot
Jews.
of jackasses that talk,
There's a
right?
lot of talking jackasses. That's exactly right. Ouch. Saying to the priest who's telling the very long story about the wise men. Yeah. And so anyway, we don't want to encourage her. So they're looking at this and they read the prophecy in the text, and then the astronomers see a star, and then they read the newspaper, if you will. In the newspaper at the time, or the historians, there was a Roman senator named Tacitus who wrote in 56 BC about there's a firm persuasion, and he said this in the Roman Senate, that at this very time, the East, he's in Rome, remember, was to grow powerful, and there was a ruler to come up out of Judea who will acquire a universal empire. That's in 56 BC. Josephus, a little bit later, wrote about the time in the country where the Jews had a belief that about that time, one from their country should become governor of the world. Another Roman senator wrote, there was a spread all over the Orient of an old and established belief that it was fated at the time for a man coming from Judea to rule the world, right? So you got sort of this focus on that part of the world. You have the star prophecy saying something's going to happen in that part of the world, and then you have a star show up, right? You with me? So this is what I imagine the Magi are seeing as they're looking for their next leader, and then Phraates dies. And when Phraates dies, they jump on it, right? And they say, this is where the king is going to come from. So what do? They send 3 guys on camels? No, they don't, Rosemary. They do not send 3 guys on camels, because that's not what the Magi do. And this is where elephants come in. So they get up, right?
Of course,
And back.
you always have elephants.
So if you're going to tell the story, there's got to be elephants. And you know why elephants? Because you can't ride hippos. So
No, they'll kill you.
yeah, they're mean, but not elephants, right? And so
More
they,
people get killed from hippos than lions in
Elephants in
Africa.
water. There's no water, Sharon.
there's water. They bring water. Sally. Come on, Sally, they
When
bring
does
water.
Phraates die?
What?
When does
2
Phraates?
BC. So now the Magi come up out of Persia, and they're on the way to get their new king. You know how the Buddhist community like looks around all over the world for their next Buddha? This is sort of the same thing, right? So they get up on their in their entourage, right? And their entourage isn't 3 guys; it's a huge group. It is a moving army, and they come moving out of Persia towards Jerusalem, and word travels on the street that the Persians are coming, which is why
They're scared.
all of Jerusalem's afraid.
Yeah.
They have a history in their living memory of the Persians ruling. Herod has a history in his living memory of people in Jerusalem who like the rule of the Persians, right? That's not good, right? And so here they come. There is fear by Herod and Jerusalem because you have the entourage coming. So why does Herod meet with them when they arrive in secret?
He's managing up.
It's managing up, right? It's what he does so well. So he meets in secret with the Magi, and so he can sort of, like he did with Mark Antony and Octavius, who's going to be the winner? He's going to pick a winner. And so he's like, okay, if the Persians are going to come and they're going to invade and they're going to rule, I might as well remain king, right? And if they don't win, I might as well remain king by not letting the Romans know I was talking to him. So he meets in secret. It's not an accident that that's in the story, because it reveals the character of Herod. So you traveling with me on this? So they talk, right? And then they move to Bethlehem, because that is where the king is to be born. So is that right? Because Herod asks his folks, where is the king? The king is to be born in Bethlehem. So they travel to Bethlehem, and the star alights over the manger. Now, how do they know it's the right manger? Because, the star probably wasn't just floating. So how did they know it was the right manger? The shepherds.
They'd already been there.
The shepherds had been there. The shepherds in the field had been there. Everybody knew that that was the place. It wasn't a secret. At this point, you had all the shepherds who were flocking around. Like, where was the king born? Well, ask the shepherds, right? Down the street, right? And then take a left on Hummus Avenue, and he's right there. Right there. So anyway, they come piling down, and they're knocking on the door, and they're Mary and Joseph with the baby Jesus. And they bow down because the prophecy is fulfilled, and they are in the presence of their next king. They pay homage. Do they pay homage because he's the son of God? Probably not, but they pay homage because he's the next king of the world. Where does the king of the world live? Persia. If you're from Persia, right? So they came to get their king, right, and take him back to Persia on the elephants. And so what's the best way to take a baby back?
The elephant.
An elephant, right? Not a hippo, but an elephant. The best way to take him back, right? But also with his mom and dad. And so what's the best way to curry favor with mom and dad?
Gifts.
Gifts, big gifts. And you say things like, these are pretty hot gifts, aren't they? However, we got tons more at home. This is nothing. This is a little tiny baby foretaste of what it means to be king of Persia and king of the world. So the gifts. So you start to think, well, that sort of makes sense now. Herod's afraid. Herod's meeting in secret. They go to Bethlehem. They know where the baby is because of the prophecy and the shepherds. They come with the gifts. They bow down because it's the king that they're going to take back to Persia. And then what happens? What's it say in the text? Bill read it.
They go home by.
They go home by another way. Why?
They've been warned in a dream.
They've been warned in a dream. So let's say that they say to Mary and Joseph, your son is the king of the world. We're taking him back to Persia. Let's say Mary and Joseph say, oh, no, you're not. Is that going to stop them?
No.
No, of course not. That's not going to stop them, right? I mean, they got an army. They put them up in the litter and walk back, right? I mean, so they're not bringing Jesus back because of Mary and Joseph necessarily, but they're warned in a dream. Now we know that the Magi, as part of their way of being in the world, were interpreted as dreams, right? And in the dream, who comes to them? An angel comes to them and warns them in a dream. What's an angel? Whether you believe in angels or not, what does an angel do no matter what? What God wants, right? Angels have no free will. So that's why angels are messengers from God, because they're not going to change the story, right? When an angel shows up, what you get is a message from God. That's what they do. Angels tell the story. Demons don't. Demons lie. They have free will, but angels don't. They're messengers from God. And they come and they talk to the Magi in a dream, and the Magi hear it. And what must the Magi know in the message from the angels? Because it's what we know to be true about God fundamentally. God is what? Love, right? God is love. And so what they realize in the dream is that the way to love God, the way to maintain relationship with God, is to give up their kingdom, power or value or ambition in favor of the greater kingdom, the kingdom of God. And so they shift, right? They shift their perspective, their orientation from the kingdom of Persia and the kingdom of the world with a new king that they're going to take back through a dream, through the message of the angels, to the kingdom of God. And so all of a sudden they're walking a different road. They go home, as Bill read, a different way, right? A new way. And they leave Jesus. Now, Jesus may have had a better life growing up as the king to be in Persia. But that's not God's plan for him, right? Because he was meant to live in that space, right? That world of ambiguity, that hotbed of contention that was Jerusalem and even in some ways remains Jerusalem, as a way of calling our attention to the greater arc, both of God's divine plan and the goodness of God's kingdom. And so that's the very long story of the Magi. You with me, John?
No,
Somebody mute John. Rosemary, any questions? Kim, Ann?
Well, what's John gonna say?
I don't know. John, what were you gonna say? Oh,
that indeed the Magi did take Jesus with them. They, as you said, they could have come from anywhere. Maybe they headed south down to Egypt. And they have a cover story. They've got a cover story that they snuck out the back door.
oh my God, that's a great idea. Oh, I love it. I'm gonna add that. They hot-footed down to Alexandria with baby Jesus. That's good, John. That's super good. Okay.
Is that from his Vatican book?
Is that from your Vatican book or is that just from you?
That's from me, but just putting the pieces together. Look at, see what you can see there, you know?
I like it. I like it because the high priest Simeon, who was put in power by Herod, was from Alexandria.
Right.
That's super interesting. I like that's a good
You
theory.
said Frida died in 2,
Phrades, yeah.
or Frades, so 2. So I've always been told, so I've had some people tell me that it took a number of years for the Magi to finally reach baby Jesus. But I'm thinking now that obviously he died, their king died 2 years before Jesus was born. So they could have easily spent that whole 2 years traveling
Easy.
wherever. So they could have been there at the time, rather than the story I've been told that it could have been several years before they actually reached baby Jesus, and he wasn't a toddler or whatever at the time. But this makes no sense.
Well, and you know, the beauty of it is we make it make sense, right? There's a lot of.
No, but it makes more sense this way because of the timing of what's going on in the world and why that birth is even another more important thing besides just birth of Jesus.
Right. So
Well, I was just wondering, where in Daniel, I was looking for it and I couldn't find it.
Daniel 6 and Daniel 9.
Because I looked in 9, I couldn't find it. Is where it mentions Bethlehem and it mentions the,
No, it doesn't mention Bethlehem.
so how did they figure out that?
Bethlehem is mentioned in Malachi.
Okay. A different prophecy?
Different prophecy. No, I mean, Malachi says that the king will be, I'm pretty sure it's Malachi. Am I right, biblical scholars on the line? Where
That's okay. I'll research it for next time. And would the Magi that were in Persia in 500 BC, would they have had Jewish texts,
sure,
books?
in their library, they
library?
definitely would have had the Old Testament. Yeah.
And so why is the star in the east?
Well, it's in the
Really the
east,
west.
it's in the east from the Romans. So the Romans prophecy was that a leader would rise up from the east.
So is it just our translation that puts it, the star in the east?
From a Roman perspective.
Okay.
Other reflections, guys? We ran a little bit over time. I'll write this up and I'll send it to you so you can read it.
Good. I think I need a timeline and a map.
I have both the timeline here and the map. Do you want me to send you a timeline?
Yeah.
I'll send you a timeline too. All right, I'm looking,
That's okay.
all right, well, so next week, I thought maybe we would look at the next story that shows up in the season of Epiphany, which is in John, the Gospel of John, the story of Jesus changing water to wine. All right. And I'll send out your water to wine test kit. You'll get it at home. And you can do it at home with me when we do it here at Bible study.
Turn water into wine.
Yeah, because the one finally came.
Somebody did it.
We probably should pray. Would somebody pray us out? We want to pray us out. Rosemary, could you pray us out?
Dear Lord, you sent us to study, and we are learning as we go. We ask you to allow the Spirit to help us to understand everything that we're learning. And we ask you to be with us each and every day in this very difficult time and to search out the truth. Amen.
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 Thank you, guys. It was nice to see you.
Thank you.
Be at peace, stay safe. If you can. If you can.